Imagine being born in the 18th century, not as a king, not as a nobleman, but as a woman. Your body would not belong to you. Your father would decide your marriage. Your husband would control your property. And society would define your worth by how obedient, fertile, and silent you could be. You could be married off at 14, risk death in childbirth with every pregnancy, face execution for adultery, and have no voice in politics, education, or law. Women of the 18th century lived dangerous lives, not on battlefields, but in kitchens, parlors, and birthing beds. Their survival was a gamble against disease, exploitation, and oppression. Some defied the rules, writers, queens, rebels, but they too paid heavy prices. The 18th century was not an age of elegance for women. It was a constant fight to endure. And this is why you wouldn't survive. Before we begin, I want to know something from you. Where are you listening from tonight? Is it late at night, when the world outside your window is silent? Or are you listening during the day, seeking a journey into history while the world rushes around you? Share your place and time in the comments below. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Whispers of History, where forgotten truths and haunting stories are brought back to life. Now, close your eyes and step into the 18th century. The powdered wigs, grand palaces, and candlelit halls may look beautiful, but beneath them lies a darker reality. For women, it was an age not of enlightenment, but of survival. The first danger began in the home. From birth, daughters were considered lesser than sons. In aristocratic families, girls were bargaining chips in political marriages. In poorer households, they were expected to labor from childhood washing, sewing, cooking, and caring for siblings. Imagine being 10 years old and already carrying water for miles, your hands raw from work. Education was rare. Boys learned philosophy and science, while girls were taught how to stitch, play music, and keep house. Their minds were caged as tightly as their corsets. A brilliant girl might write secretly by candlelight, but if caught, she risked ridicule or punishment. Women's intellect was dismissed as dangerous. Their curiosity mocked as vanity. The very act of learning became rebellion. In the 18th century, knowledge for women was a privilege and, often, a forbidden one. Marriage was not romance, but transaction. Families arranged unions to secure wealth, land, or alliances. A girl's consent mattered little. Her future was decided by her father. Imagine being 14, dressed in lace, married to a man twice your age, his face unfamiliar, his touch unwanted. Once married, everything you owned became your dowry, your property, even your children. Divorce was nearly impossible, and separation meant ruin. In England, the law of coverture made women legally invisible under their husbands. A wife could not own property, sign contracts, or even have custody of her children. To disobey was to risk scandal, violence, or exile. Marriage was less a partnership and more a prison, its bars gilded with promises of duty and honor. For many women, it was a life sentence. The gravest danger came with childbirth. Without modern medicine, every pregnancy carried the risk of death. Midwives delivered babies with unwashed hands. Infections spread, and complications were rarely survivable. Imagine the terror of labor pains in a candlelit chamber, knowing you might never see daylight again. The phrase "she is in her confinement" was often a death sentence. Maternal mortality was so common that women wrote farewell letters before giving birth. Noble women, despite their wealth, died in droves. Queen Caroline of Ansbach, wife of King George II, endured agonizing childbirths that left her broken, and she eventually died from complications. For poorer women, the risks were even greater, their bodies worn out by repeated pregnancies and lack of care. Motherhood was seen as a duty, but survival was uncertain. Every child brought joy shadowed by the specter of death. Even survival within marriage did not guarantee safety. Women were bound by strict codes of morality. Adultery, even suspected, could lead to public ruin, exile, or worse. In France, some women were locked in convents against their will, condemned to live in silence for life. In England, women were branded in court as liars, or said actresses if they accused men of abuse. Imagine being struck by your husband and told it was his right. Domestic violence was accepted, even legalized under the infamous rule of thumb. The belief a man could beat his wife with a stick, no thicker than his thumb. Women were trapped, their voices silenced, their bodies controlled. The home was not a refuge, but another battlefield where survival meant endurance. And yet, even in this grim reality, some women fought back. Writers like Mary Wollstonecraft challenged male philosophers, demanding education and equality. Her work, A Vindication of the Rights of Woman, shook Europe with its boldness, but she was scorned as unfeminine and dangerous. Queens like Catherine the Great of Russia wielded power with iron will, but their reigns were filled with scandal and constant threats to their legitimacy. Because of their gender, rebels like women in the French Revolution marched to Versailles, demanding bread and justice, their cries shaking monarchies. These rare stories of defiance shine through the darkness, but they also prove how high the cost of resistance could be. To fight the system was to invite scorn, exile, or death. Few survived with both power and peace intact. The 18th century was an age of enlightenment for men. For women, it was an age of danger, silence, and struggle. Their lives were defined not by choice, but by survival. From birth to death, every stage carried risk. Child labor, forced marriage, deadly childbirth, abusive husbands, and oppressive laws. Even rebellion meant peril. Imagine yourself in their place, born in a world where every decision about your life was made by someone else. Could you survive? The truth is harsh. Most of us would not. And as we continue deeper into this story, we will uncover each layer of this reality in detail: the dangers of marriage, the brutality of childbirth, the hypocrisy of morality, and the rare courage of women who defied it all. But first, we must step into the parlor where the trap of marriage began. Marriage was the turning point in nearly every woman's life during the 18th century, yet it was rarely a choice. For the wealthy, it was a transaction. For the poor, it was survival. Imagine being a girl of 13, told you would soon be married to a man you had never met. For noble families, daughters were bargaining chips, married off to strengthen alliances or secure dowries. For working families, girls were married young to reduce the burden on the household. Consent was irrelevant. A daughter's future was decided not by her heart, but by contracts, signatures, and financial gain. Love was seldom part of the equation. Marriage promised security for the family, but for the girl, it often meant lifelong subjugation. From the moment vows were spoken, her body, her wealth, and her freedom belonged to her husband. It was not a wedding, it was a transaction. The law sealed this arrangement. In England, under the system of coverture, a married woman's legal existence disappeared. She could not own property, sign contracts, or sue in her own name. Everything she possessed became her husband's, from the land in her dowry to the clothes on her back. Even her children were legally his. Imagine giving birth, nurturing a child, and then being told you had no right to them. If your husband chose to take them away, or send them to school, or serve as you could do nothing. Divorce was nearly impossible, available only to the wealthy, and it carried enormous scandal. For most women, the law was a trap. Once married, there was no escape. Independence was lost forever, and the walls of that prison were sanctioned by church and state. Child marriages were not unusual, especially among the elite. In France, noble girls could be wed at 12, their lives bound to men decades older. In rural England or colonial America, it was common for teenage girls to marry older widowers seeking caretakers for their children. Imagine being a child, expected to step into the role of wife and mother before your body had even finished growing. Many girls became pregnant before their hips were wide enough to carry safely, leading to fatal complications in childbirth. Even when they survived, the trauma was lifelong. Their youth was stolen, their futures predetermined. While some romanticize the 18th century as an age of elegance, the reality for these young brides was far darker. They were victims of a system that valued them only as vessels for heirs and property. For women in poorer households, the marriage trap looked different but was just as brutal. Without wealth or dowries, they were expected to marry quickly to relieve the family of their upkeep. Imagine a father arranging a match with the local blacksmith or farmer, not for love, but for survival. Women who failed to marry were branded spinsters, ridiculed, and left with few options but domestic service or dependence on relatives. The stigma was suffocating. To live unmarried was to live outside society's respect, with whispers and pity shadowing you everywhere. For many women, it was not simply about survival in the present, but about securing a future in a world that offered no independence. Marriage, however harsh, was often the only path left open. Even within marriage, a woman's behavior was policed. Husbands controlled not only their wives' wealth and bodies, but their reputations. Infidelity by a man was often overlooked, excused as natural, but for a woman it was catastrophic. An adulterous wife could lose everything: her home, her children, and her life. In some parts of Europe, she could even face execution. Imagine living every day under suspicion. Your fidelity a matter not of private trust, but of public judgment. Husbands accused wives of adultery, not always for truth, but sometimes as an excuse to rid themselves of them. For women, reputation was as fragile as glass, and once broken, there was no repair. Marriage, then, was not a safe haven, it was a cage with walls made of law, morality, and fear. Yet, there were rare women who resisted. Some used their intelligence to navigate the system, gaining influence through salons, literature, or the subtle manipulation of their husband's power. Others, like Mary Wollstonecraft, spoke openly against marriage as an institution of slavery. Her words, "Marriage may be considered as the most irreconcilable enemy of the female sex," echoed the hidden frustrations of countless women. Yet her defiance came at a price: ridicule, scorn, and scandal. Few dared to follow in her footsteps. For most women, silence was the only survival. And as we move deeper into the 18th century, we will see how silence itself became deadly, especially in childbirth, where a woman's life often ended before she had truly begun. Are you ready to step into the birthing chamber, where danger loomed with every breath? Childbirth in the 18th century was not a joyous event, it was a battlefield. Women entered the birthing chamber knowing they might never leave alive. Without antiseptics, without anesthesia, and with little understanding of infection, labor was a gamble with death. Midwives, often untrained, reused tools without cleaning them. Physicians, when called, sometimes caused more harm with their crude instruments. Imagine lying on a narrow bed in a candlelit room, your body racked with pain, while unwashed hands and blood-stained sheets surrounded you. Every contraction brought fear, not just for the child, but for yourself. Death in childbirth was so common, it was considered almost ordinary. Husbands prepared wills, families whispered prayers, and women themselves often wrote farewell letters before going into labor. To become a mother was not only a duty, but a deadly risk, one that thousands would not survive. The statistics were grim. In parts of Europe, as many as 1 in 10 women died in childbirth. Wealth offered little protection. Noble women died as frequently as peasants, their fragile health weakened by endless pregnancies. Queen Caroline of Ansbach, wife of King George II, endured 10 deliveries, each leaving her weaker, until complications ended her life at just 54. Empress Maria Theresa of Austria gave birth to 16 children, nearly dying multiple times in labor. Imagine the world's most powerful women surrounded by doctors, servants, and luxuries, still helpless against the dangers of childbirth. If queens could not escape the risks, What chance did ordinary women have? Death in the birthing bed united women across class lines. A grim reminder that no amount of status could shield them from fate. For poorer women, the ordeal was even crueler. They gave birth in one-room cottages, often alone or with only a neighbor's help. Sanitation was non-existent, and infections spread rapidly. Imagine a woman laboring on a dirt floor, her other children crying in the corner while her husband worked in the fields. If complications arose, breech, birth, hemorrhage, or infection, there was little hope. Many women bled to death within hours, their bodies buried in unmarked graves. Children were often left motherless, raised by relatives, or sent to orphanages. In rural communities, stories of women dying in childbirth were so common they became expected. It was not a tragedy, it was routine. Survival was the exception, not the rule. For women in the 18th century, motherhood was less a blessing than a death sentence waiting to strike. Those who survived childbirth often faced another danger, infection known as childbed fever. Doctors, ignorant of hygiene, carried bacteria from one patient to another. Imagine a physician delivering a baby after performing an autopsy, his hands still stained, his instruments unwashed. Within days, the mother would develop fever, chills, and excruciating pain. Death came swiftly, often within a week. Entire maternity wards in cities like Paris and London became death traps, where women entered alive and left as corpses. Families wept, but the cycle continued, the cause unknown. It would not be until the 19th century that doctors, like Semmelweis, connected hand-washing with survival. For 18th century women, however, knowledge came too late. Childbed fever was another invisible executioner, striking without mercy, and few ever escaped its grip. And yet, society romanticized motherhood, glorifying women who bore many children as paragons of virtue. A woman's worth was tied to her fertility, her body expected to produce heirs no matter the cost. Imagine being expected to endure 10, 12, or even 15 pregnancies, each one carrying the risk of death. Women were praised for dying in service to their families, their sacrifices treated as noble rather than tragic. Obedience to this ideal was demanded by church and state alike. Those who could not bear children or chose not to were shamed, pitied, or cast out. Women were reduced to wombs, their lives measured in births and funerals. The cycle was brutal, endless, and merciless. Survival was not celebrated. It was simply demanded. But there were women who resisted. Some turned to herbal remedies, midwives with centuries of knowledge passed secretly among women. Others defied expectations altogether, refusing marriage or motherhood, choosing convents or intellectual pursuits instead. Yet even these women were branded unnatural, accused of shirking their duty to society. The 18th century offered no safe path for women. Whether they conformed or rebelled, they faced danger at every turn. And as we move forward, the story only darkens because, beyond childbirth, lay another battlefield. The courts of morality and reputation, where a woman's honor could be destroyed in an instant, and survival depended not on strength, but on silence. Are you ready to step into that perilous world? If childbirth threatened women's bodies, reputation threatened their very existence. In the 18th century, a woman's honor was her most fragile possession, and it could be destroyed in a single whisper. Imagine living in a world where your worth depended not on your intelligence, talents, or achievements, but on how pure others believed you to be. A stolen kiss, a secret letter, even walking unchaperoned with a man could ignite scandal. Men's indiscretions were shrugged off, but women's reputations, once tarnished, could never be repaired. A man might rise after disgrace. A woman would fall forever. In this brutal system, gossip was as deadly as disease, and survival demanded silence, obedience, and constant self-policing. For women, every action was a performance, and one mistake meant exile. It was a world where the walls of the drawing room were as suffocating as the bars of a prison. Consider the fate of women accused of adultery. In England, the punishment could mean public shame, separation, and loss of children. In France, some were confined to convents against their will, locked away for life in silence and prayer. In Catholic Spain and Italy, the punishment could be even more severe, with women beaten, imprisoned, or executed. Imagine being accused by your husband, not because you were guilty, but because he wished to be rid of you. His word was enough to ruin you. Trials for adultery were rarely about justice. They were about power. Women had no defense. A man's affairs were overlooked, even celebrated, but a woman's supposed betrayal was treated as treason. The double standard was crushing, and countless lives were destroyed by accusations that had little basis in truth. The danger extended to unmarried women as well. To be labeled unchaste was to be condemned. Unwed mothers were cast out, their children branded illegitimate and denied inheritance. Many ended in workhouses, begging on the streets, or forced into prostitution. Imagine being a young servant girl, seduced her, assaulted by her master, only to find herself pregnant, shamed, and abandoned. Her child might be sent to an orphanage, where mortality rates were staggering. Society blamed her entirely, while the man walked away unscathed. For women, morality was a trap. They were expected to remain virtuous, but often left defenseless against the very men who dictated their fates. To fall was not always a choice, but was often forced upon them. Yet society never forgave. Reputation was also used as a weapon. Rivals in court or society spread rumors to ruin opponents, particularly among women competing for influence. At Versailles, for example, whispers of adultery or scandal were enough to exile a queen's favorite or topple a mistress from power. Imagine being surrounded by glittering chandeliers, silk gowns, and powdered wigs, yet knowing one rumor could end your life of luxury. Women at court balanced on a knife's edge, their survival dependent on charm, caution, and constant vigilance. Few navigated it successfully, and those who did often paid a heavy emotional price. Every smile, every gesture, every word was a calculation. In the 18th century, a woman's life was not lived for herself, but for the opinions of others. And one wrong step could lead to ruin. Even literature and philosophy reflected this double standard. Women who dared to write about love, desire, or independence were branded immoral. Authors like Mary Wollstonecraft were accused of being unfeminine, scandalous, even dangerous. In France, female writers like Olympe de Gouges demanded equality. Only to meet brutal fates de Gouges was guillotined during the Revolution. Imagine holding a pen, writing words that challenged male dominance, and knowing those words might cost your life. The world of ideas, celebrated as the Enlightenment, was open to men but barred to women. Even when women contributed to it, their voices were silenced, mocked, or erased. Morality, then, was not only about behavior, it was about silencing women who dared to dream of freedom. The trap of reputation left women with few safe choices. To obey was to live silently under male authority. To rebel was to risk scandal, exile, or death. Most women walked the narrow path in between, sacrificing freedom for survival. Imagine yourself in their place. One rumor could destroy your life. One mistake could take your children. One accusation could end in the noose. It was a world where survival demanded perfect obedience in a system designed to break you. But reputation was not the only battlefield. In the next chapter, we step into the darker realm of law and punishment, where women could be imprisoned, branded, or executed not for what they did, but for what they represented. Are you ready to face the gallows with them? The courts of the 18th century were no refuge for women. They were cages of fear and instruments of control. Laws were written by men, enforced by men, and used against women with ruthless efficiency. Imagine standing in a courtroom, your fate in the hands of judges and jurors who believed you weaker, less rational, and naturally deceitful. Women accused of crimes were doubly condemned, once for breaking the law, and again for daring to act outside their prescribed roles. Even innocence offered no shield. Trials became theatre, where a woman's reputation was shredded publicly before the verdict was delivered. For the poor, justice was harsher still. Without money or influence, women were left defenseless. Their voices were ignored, their fates sealed long before judgment was pronounced. The law was not blind, stared directly at women and saw guilt. Punishments were brutal, often designed to humiliate as much as to harm. In England and parts of Europe, women convicted of theft could be whipped in public, branded with hot irons, or dragged through the streets in shame. Imagine standing in a marketplace, your back bared, while a crowd jeered and stones were thrown as lashes cut your skin. For prostitution or loose morals, women could be locked in cages, exposed in stocks, or paraded with iron collars around their necks. These punishments were not only about crime, but about control. They reminded every woman watching what awaited those who defied society's rules. Fear was the weapon, and pain was the lesson. The spectacle was meant to teach obedience, but it also revealed the cruelty of a system designed to keep women in chains. Prisons offered no escape from suffering. Women were often confined in filthy, overcrowded cells alongside men, with no protection from abuse. Disease spread quickly. Smallpox, typhus, and plague claimed countless lives behind bars. Imagine lying on damp straw, rats crawling across your body, the stench of human waste choking the air. Guards, poorly paid, often exploited female prisoners, trading food or safety for favors. Those who survived carried lifelong scars, both physical and emotional. Yet many women were imprisoned not for violent crimes but for poverty, for prostitution, or for debts they could never repay. In the 18th century, being poor as a woman was a crime in itself. Survival was rare, dignity was impossible. Witchcraft trials, though fading, still lingered in some corners of Europe. Women, often widows, healers, or simply unpopular, were accused of consorting with the devil. Imagine being dragged before a court, neighbors testifying that your herbs cured too well, or that your barren cow must be your fault. Though the great witch hunts of earlier centuries had waned, the stigma persisted. In isolated regions of Germany, Poland, and Scandinavia, women were still executed for witchcraft in the early 1700s. Torture was used freely: thumbscrews, strappado, or the rack-forcing confessions from innocent mouths. Fire awaited those condemned. For the accused, there was no winning. To deny was to be tortured, to confess was to be burned. The echo of these executions haunted the century. A chilling reminder that even in the Age of Enlightenment, superstition and cruelty reigned. Even noble women were not safe from the law's cruelty. In France, the case of the Marquise de Brinvilliers shocked society. Accused of poisoning her father and brothers in the 1670s, her trial lingered as a scandal well into the 18th century. Cited as proof that women's ambition was deadly, she was tortured, forced to confess, and burned at the stake. In England, women convicted of petty treason, murdering their husbands, were executed not by hanging but by burning. Imagine being tied to a stake, flames rising around you, the crowd watching as your life ended in smoke. For men, treason meant death. For women, it meant spectacle. Their punishment was not only to die but to serve as a warning. Their bodies consumed publicly to terrify others into submission. The gallows cast a long shadow over every woman in the 18th century. Execution was the ultimate punishment, reserved not only for murder or treason but often for theft or rebellion. Women like Mary Blandy, convicted of poisoning her father in 1752, became infamous, her trial feeding both fear and fascination. Crowds gathered by the thousands to watch her hang, treating her death as entertainment. Imagine walking to the scaffold, the rope waiting, your name already written in pamphlets and ballads to be sold in the streets. Your life ended, your story twisted, your body forgotten. The 18th century offered women little mercy in life and none in death. The courts, prisons, and gallows revealed the darkest truth. In the 18th century, survival was not guaranteed by obedience, but often destroyed by it. Women who conformed risked death in childbirth. Women who rebelled risked death at the stake or the noose. The law was not designed to protect them, it was built to control them. And yet, in the shadows of this brutality, women still resisted. They whispered ideas of freedom, they marched in protest, they wrote words that challenged kings and philosophers alike. In the next part, we step into the storm of revolution when women rose not only against their husbands, but against entire nations. But could they win, or would rebellion only bring more death? By the late 18th century, whispers of freedom spread across Europe and the Americas. Men declared rights, liberty, and equality, but women who dared to claim the same were met with scorn, exile, or death. Imagine standing in a crowded square in Paris as revolutionaries proclaimed the end of tyranny, only to discover that their new vision of liberty did not include you. For women, the 18th century's revolutions were both opportunity and trap. They marched, wrote, and fought, but every step into politics invited backlash. The dream of freedom was intoxicating, but for women, it often became a death sentence. The danger was not only the guillotine, but also betrayal by those who promised equality yet denied it. Revolutions promised hope, but for women, survival was still uncertain. Their courage became legend, but their fates revealed how fragile progress truly was. In France, women played a pivotal role in the revolution. On October 5, 1789, thousands of Parisian women, furious over bread shortages, marched to Versailles. Imagine the pounding of their feet on cobblestones, their voices rising in furious chants as they stormed the palace demanding food and justice. Their courage forced the king and queen back to Paris, a turning point in the revolution. Yet their triumph did not bring lasting power. The revolutionary government soon silenced women, banning their political clubs and excluding them from citizenship. Olympe de Gouges, who dared to publish the Declaration of the Rights of Woman and of the Female Citizen, was arrested and guillotined in 1793. Her crime was not treason, but audacity, the audacity to demand equality. Her death symbolized the revolution's betrayal. Liberty for men, silence for women. Across the Atlantic, the American Revolution echoed similar contradictions. Women, like Abigail Adams, urged leaders to remember the ladies when drafting laws, warning that women would not remain silent if excluded. Yet her plea was dismissed by her husband, John Adams, who mocked it as a joke. Imagine the frustration of watching men fight for independence while denying it to half the population. Women contributed nonetheless. They boycotted British goods, managed farms and businesses during war, and even disguised themselves as men to fight. Deborah Sampson, for instance, donned men's clothing and served in the Continental Army, but recognition was rare and rights were denied. The new nation spoke of freedom, but its women remained bound by old chains. Revolution, once again, was a stage where women bled but were not acknowledged. Even queens found themselves caught in the storm. Marie Antoinette, the most famous woman of the French Revolution, became a symbol of tyranny, her reputation twisted by scandal and rumor. Pamphlets accused her of affairs, decadence, and betrayal, branding her Madame Deficit. Imagine standing trial, every eye filled with hatred, as lies became truth and gossip became evidence. Her execution in 1793 was not only political, it was gendered, a punishment for daring to embody power as a woman. Similarly, Catherine the Great in Russia faced constant attacks on her legitimacy. Despite her brilliance and reforms, her enemies spread lurid rumors about her lovers, reducing her reign to scandal. In both cases, women in power were judged not for their policies, but for their private lives. Their authority always undermined by gendered attacks. The revolution also exposed women to raw physical danger. Riots, mob violence, and executions swept cities, and women were often the first to suffer. In Paris, poor women who demanded bread risked being trampled or shot. In Haiti, enslaved women joined the Great Rebellion, fighting for freedom against colonial masters, but faced brutal retaliation if captured. Imagine standing in a square as the guillotine blade fell again and again, your fate uncertain, your survival hinging on the mood of a crowd. In every revolution, women's bodies became battleground symbols of justice, vengeance, or shame. Their courage brought change, but their suffering was immense. Survival was never guaranteed. Victory was always stolen from their hands. And yet, despite betrayal, despite executions, women refused silence. Writers, activists, and mothers alike sowed the seeds of future change. Mary Wollstonecraft, in England, declared in 1792 that women's rights were human rights. Her words would inspire generations long after her death. Revolution may not have freed women in the 18th century, but it cracked open the door. Imagine standing at that threshold, bloodied, silenced, yet refusing to give up. Women in the 18th century did not win equality, but they ensured it could no longer be ignored. Their survival was fragile, but their voices endured. And as we step into the final chapter of this story, we will confront the ultimate truth: why survival itself, for women in the 18th century, was a near impossible battle. Are you ready for the final reckoning? The 18th century promised elegance, progress, and enlightenment, but for women, it was a world of chains. Imagine stepping into that era as yourself, stripped of the freedoms you know today. Your education denied, your marriage arranged, your body controlled by law and church. Every stage of life carried risk: childhood labor, a forced marriage, deadly childbirth, scandal that could exile you, courts that branded you guilty before you spoke, revolutions that used you and then betrayed you. Women lived not as individuals, but as shadows of the men around them. Their survival was not celebrated, was expected, and most did not survive. The 18th century was not golden for women. It was a crucible of suffering, endurance, and silent resistance. To live through it was less a life than a sentence. Could you endure such a world where every breath was borrowed and every step was dangerous? Childbirth, more than any battlefield, consumed women's lives. Thousands died each year in their confinements, their bodies broken by endless pregnancies. Imagine standing by a cradle, knowing the next child you bore might cost your life. Even queens with physicians at their side could not escape, their deaths proving that wealth offered no protection. Childbed fever, hemorrhage, or malnutrition all struck without mercy. To be a mother was to gamble your existence, to write farewell letters before labor, to accept death as a companion. For modern listeners, the thought is unbearable, yet for 18th century women, it was reality. They did not ask if childbirth would kill them. They asked when. The nursery was built beside the grave, and joy was forever shadowed by mourning. This truth alone shows why you would not survive. Marriage, too, stripped away survival's hope. The law of coverture erased women's identities, rendering wives invisible. Imagine signing no contracts, owning no property, claiming no rights, even over your children. A woman's body became her husband's possession, her silence demanded by church and state alike. Domestic violence was excused as a husband's right. Infidelity punished only when committed by the wife. Love was irrelevant. Survival meant obedience. Some women endured quietly, others resisted in whispers, but few escaped. Even those who left legacies, queens, mistresses, rebels, were bound by the same laws that silenced ordinary women. To marry in the 18th century was not to find companionship, but to enter a gilded prison. And for many, the sentence was lifelong. The law and its punishments made survival even harder. Women were branded, whipped, caged, or burned, their bodies used as lessons for others. Imagine the humiliation of standing in a marketplace as lashes cut your back. or the terror of hearing a death sentence for crimes men committed with impunity. Poverty itself became a crime, dragging women into prisons filled with disease and abuse. The courts treated women as liars by nature, their words dismissed, their fates predetermined. Even accusations of witchcraft lingered, claiming lives in remote corners of Europe. The gallows loomed as a final threat, where women were hanged or burned to entertain the crowd. In the 18th century, survival was not simply difficult, it was nearly impossible. The law did not protect women, it devoured them. Reputation bound women in invisible chains, every gesture judged, every whisper a threat. To fall from grace was to be ruined forever. A single accusation of immorality could exile a woman to a convent, strip her of her children, or leave her begging on the streets. Men's indiscretions were excused, women's were fatal. Imagine living in fear of gossip, where one rumor could undo a lifetime. Even queens like Marie Antoinette fell to the power of scandal, their lives destroyed by lies more than by truth. The performance of purity was constant, exhausting, and unavoidable. Silence was the only shield, yet even silence could not always save. In this fragile world, reputation was life itself, and once shattered, survival was over. And yet, women fought back. Mary Wollstonecraft declared women's rights. Olympie de Gouges faced the guillotine. Deborah Sampson disguised herself to fight in battle. They resisted in pens, in protests, in quiet rebellions at home. Their courage cracked open doors, their voices carried into the centuries to come. But in their own time, they paid dearly ridicule, exile, imprisonment, even death. The Enlightenment promised reason and progress, but it denied women both. Survival was not about living freely, it was about enduring chains. Women endured, but they should not have had to. Their courage laid the groundwork for the freedoms we take for granted today. But in the 18th century, those freedoms were dreams still far away. This is why you would not survive as a woman in the 18th century. You would not survive the birthing bed. You would not survive the courts. You would not survive the gossip, the marriage laws, the prisons, the revolutions that promised equality yet denied it. Few did. Those who lived endured silently, their stories forgotten, their voices erased. But history whispers their truths to us, now reminding us that survival itself was extraordinary. So, as you listen tonight, ask yourself, could you live in a world where your life, your body, and your voice were never your own? Could you endure the 18th century's chains? Or would you, like so many women of that time, be crushed by them? The answer is clear. Most of us would not survive.